Hey everybody, welcome to the Wenner Folsom podcast, your source for battle-tested leadership and resiliency. You're really going to love this episode. Today we jump in with Michael Gay, a longtime friend of both Philip and myself, and he's also a Gestalt therapist. He's one of the best in the world at doing shadow work, for those of you that have heard this term. Just an amazing human and man who's also been in our K4 community. He's served in a lot of other men's community, and he's literally just one of the most intelligent, powerful, and also compassionate men that we've ever met. So today what he talks about is, one, how an emotional tourniquet that you put on a decade or two or three ago is still affecting your life, and how it may be the source of anxiety, depression, addictions, or a lot of unhealthy things in your life. Or how to move more into identifying what it means to step into a lover archetype. And for those of you that listen to our podcast a lot, you'll know what this means. And by doing so, how to move from the other archetypes, which is more doing, and how this archetype is more being, and what it means to get that life force back in your body.
And for us warrior class people and the men and women listening in our warrior communities, are you able to fully participate in the life that you're willing to sacrifice yourself for or to serve? And that's the big piece. Are you willing to take that tourniquet off and live fully, so you don't lose the limb, you don't lose that portion of your life? Michael also talks about, as soon as we take that tourniquet off, we need to have others around who can stitch us up. So who are those people? Who are those chaplains and therapists and the community? And that return of vitality is something that we have to constantly recommit to, because it is perennial. He unpacks also that we are formed in relationship, and that we're wounded in relationship, and that we need to be healed in relationship. And all of these things are absolutely central to warrior resiliency.
So epic episode. Stay tuned. You're going to get a lot of value from it. We'll see you in a few. All right. Welcome to the Wenner Folsom podcast. And we have a really exciting episode for you today. Today, we're talking with our longtime friend and ally, Michael Gay. And he's been a huge pillar in our community, a bunch of other communities of men, been doing men's work for a long time, in addition to some of the shadow work that we may get into a little bit here, that I'm a huge advocate of and have studied with Michael as well. So we're going to get into lots of different topics, but the primary one that's landed the most for us is this concept of a tourniquet. And so stay tuned to listen in to what are the consequences of you putting on an emotional tourniquet if it's been on for a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades or 4, and what are the benefits of being able to remove that tourniquet, what happens to your life, what comes back into your life, and how can you experience more freedom. So it's going to be a fun episode today. So welcome, Michael. Yeah. So I think first, I think what's most pressing is, I know you do a lot of work, and maybe we'll lean into the tourniquet, but it sounds like first is this, you do a lot of work around men's work, and you do a lot of work around addiction. You do a lot of work around helping people find their peace inside. And so where does this idea of the tourniquet come from? Like, as you're describing this tourniquet, where does it get, when do we put on the tourniquet? Let's start there. Why do people put on the tourniquets, whether it be men or people that go through heavy traumatic experiences or grief?
Yeah, you bet. I think the first piece is to lay down some groundwork around what the tourniquet is put on. And we got to expand our worldview a little bit first, in that there are different parts of us, that there are mental parts of us, physical parts of us, emotional, spiritual parts of us. And so the worldview has to expand to accommodate this idea of flow of life force. And we preserve our flow of life force in our physical bodies, just like we preserve it in our other parts too. And so the tourniquet comes along when people go through extremely taxing or stressful or damaging or destabilizing experiences to the whole being, to the psyche. There's things that we do to preserve our life force. And just like short-term coping strategies on the battlefield, we do that to ourselves emotionally and psychically also. And the way that we do that is we restrict flow. Like the idea is to keep blood flow where it is most needed. So we get these wounds to our psyche and to our hearts and to our deep self, and we restrict the flow of energy inside of us almost unconsciously to adapt and just to stay okay, And so you go through something intensely traumatic, intensely overwhelming or stressful or destabilizing, and it's an abstract concept. We just got to say that. There's some sort of contraction that happens inside of a person when we go through hard shit. And some people can go through a lot more hard shit than others and not be affected, but at some point everybody's affected. And so on some sort of energetic level, we contract to preserve the life force. So if you think of the metaphor, just like on our physical body, if we get a wound on an extremity and someone throws a tourniquet on there, that's to preserve our life force from leaking out. We save the body by risking a part of us. And it's meant to be a short-term coping strategy. You put that sucker on there and then you get to help as quick as you can so that they can take it off and you get stitched up. But what's happening is we have a culture where we don't take care of the wounds to the deep self. And we make careers of piling on wounds. And we make ways of life out of piling on wounds. And it become all of these like microcultural ways of keeping that life force from leaking out, but we don't look at the consequence of doing that. The consequence of, there's a benefit of warrior culture and there's also a consequence of warrior culture. We like to think of it in terms of maturation. There's immature and there's very mature warrior culture. And so going into mature warrior culture means when we get really deep blows to the deep self, to our emotional body, to our psyche, we need to go someplace where someone's going to stitch us up and patch us up so we can go back out in the world and rehab ourselves and be okay. Otherwise, we're going to develop a coping strategy that lasts 20 years, that's not meant to last 20 years. So again, we do these short-term coping strategies of contracting, not thinking about it, distracting, stuffing it down, cutting off our deeper feeling parts, cutting off certain parts of our mind, our relational selves. And then it's no surprise that later in life we see men that live nobly in warrior culture, then suffering in their relationships, in their mental health, in their spiritual health, and getting involved in addiction, divorce, all those kinds of things. And so we introduced this model of the tourniquet to help you understand that a lot of what happens in warrior culture is people do things to cope that are actually short-term coping strategies. They shouldn't be a long-term way of life. And so the work that we're trying to do is to get people into those wounds, to heal them up, to take off that tourniquet, to stop living as sort of a contracted, contained being, and to recognize, like, you've lost a lot of your vitality. Like, here's the telltale signs. You're depressed, man. You're addicted. Your relationship with your kids is struggling. Those are all signs that the flow of your natural life force is compromised. And so we've got to get in there and do something. And the first step is acknowledging that those wounds happened and that something happened to, manage that, but it's not a good long-term way of being.
Brilliant. Heavy right there. That was emotional. I think what's not abstract about this is I don't cry very often. I cry when my dogs die. So once every 10 years. That's the tourniquet, right?
It's totally the tourniquet, man.
I mean, that at some point there was a short-term coping strategy of when I was young, I could not afford to be weak or be seen being weak. And so I tourniqueted that little emotional thing off, and I am now a man who doesn't cry.
You know what's so interesting is because Philip and I both work with Michael, by the way, at different periods. And currently I've been working with Michael, and this is one thing that I've just come across, Phil, the exact same. The only time I cry is during movies. For some reason, that's even when somebody dies, I cry one day and then that's it. And so for me, it's the same thing. I realize there's a tourniquet down in here of control. So mine's the control tourniquet, and I want to control those emotions. So it's just it's interesting how this shows up. And I think leading to this, how do you see this playing out into men's work? I mean, because, two things I'm curious of. First, I know, Philip, we talk a lot about warrior culture. And one of the things Michael said is, hey, our culture and our society currently doesn't value or doesn't place value on this reintegration. And, I just think of the parallel. I know you've been studying warrior culture for a long time. And, uh, how many warrior cultures actually did reintegration practices to actually take the tourniquets off emotionally after battle?
Yeah, and just from an anthropological viewpoint, there has always been the shaman or the chaplain. I mean, we have formerly a chaplain who's another therapist, right? Chaplains are therapists in the military, embedded in combat units. It's that integral, and they're starting to phase that out in many units. But like that is this echo to exactly what you're saying, that we have purification, healing, reintegration rituals that are embedded in all warrior culture, and we've lost most of them. And so that tourniquet conversation is incredibly important from what you just said, that you need to have somebody in there to stitch you up.
Yeah,
because
you
if you don't
yourself.
have that, yeah, and you just whip that tourniquet off, which means I threw away my crutches. Well, now what? If there's nobody there, if you don't have powerful allies who are going to hold space for you, who have the tools to reintegrate you and to stitch you up, and you just got rid of your coping mechanisms, now where are you?
Well, and again, looking at all warrior culture, Spartans, samurai, Native American, like if we look at all these cultures, they all did reintegration. So I'm curious, why do you guys think where do we lose it? Like, that's a curiosity. Like, if we used to do this back in the day, why did we lose it? And is that the effect of why we're having so much mental health and suicide skyrocketing and all these problems? Because my thought is tribe. I think we had tribe and community that supported each other, that you knew, that helped you reintegrate and purify and purge. And then we lost community, and everybody's a bunch of fucking lone wolves walking around trying to protect themselves and isolate. So that's my perspective. Curious, is it similar, different, Philip, Michael, on where do we lose it and what do we need to bring this back?
I will happily speculate with you fellas. And in my line of work in Gestalt, we rarely ask the question why, because it puts us into our heads. In my experience, cultures always are gaining and losing wisdom. We haven't figured out how to keep a body of wisdom solidly at the core of a culture for a very long period of time. And in the ones that do, great, but they also still fade. And so to me, this is one of those perennial wisdoms that we get to be a part of reviving and revitalizing and rediscovering. And it got lost, clearly. Like, we would be, and the symbols of that are our struggles with health, with mental health, spiritual health, relational health, physical health. So we just look at the unhealth and say something's missing. And we've got to update our model of what health is. And we see this heavily in warrior culture. So we're just reverse engineering this. So we've got to come up with a body of wisdom. It did get lost somewhere. Who knows how it got lost? I don't know. Modernization, industrialization, shifting around of societal family structures, shifting spiritual traditions, the rise of science. Who knows? But we've got to use those things to rebuild a mature culture. And in my world, the body is a great map. Ideas change, but we always have our bodies. And so we'll go to the body as a model of health. What makes us vital? What makes us bright? What makes us bright in all quadrants of our lives? And you can see that reflected in people's energy and in their body.
Well, and I know my viewpoint came from Philip, really learning from you and your background on tribe and building culture. And that's where that's come from, because I think that's where I was. I was alone and I was a lone wolf. And that's why I was in this pain, as I was shut off from the world, and I needed community to be seen, actually to be seen in my pain, which has been probably the hardest, and to feel vulnerable enough to go in and do some forms of shadow work or do some forms of healing and quit severing the parts of my life that didn't work, which we talk about our 4 levels of trauma, and actually start healing breaks and go into there and feel like what's not working and find good mentors and allies, and then have community. Like Philip, we've gone through all these heroes journeys mending our breaks together. So is it similar to your perspective? Because I know that's where I think a lot of mine formed from.
Perfect. I'd love to hear.
Hey, the when we established K4 and then Valor, we were looking at establishing a culture where men were not only encouraged but expected to grow, because I think that was part of the something that defined meaning and purpose. And happy people are people who are, or particularly men who are progressing on things, but growth without some direction seemed kind of meaningless. It was almost the philosophy of a cancer cell. So we had growth and we added service as the core of what men needed to be doing. And then we realized that we were there was a missing component, and we were exhausted and we were burned out, and the growth in the service didn't solve the life force conversation that you brought up. And so we added vitality in as our third core piece and for Joshua and I, we've been in leadership, personal growth, self-exploration for decades, 50 years between us. And yet it took us a lot of soul searching to go like, oh, vitality, that life force, it eluded. And I think, when we look at the end of every hero's journey, even Campbell says that we're not on this journey to save the world, but to save ourselves. But in doing so, we end up saving the world, because vital people vitalize. So when we become vital ourselves, we do save the fucking world. And again, that may be the perennial wisdom you're speaking about, is that's our job, is to keep exploring, how do we bring vitality back? Oh, we just lost it again. How do we bring vitality back? And so the tourniquet conversation is again, that's a perennial piece also. It's probably something that is hardwired into people who do hard things. At some point, there is a baseline that has to be set for survival. So when we're looking at incredibly high trauma experiences or phases of life, we do have to close the aperture so that you're not letting all that in. And at some point, it's just I'm gonna close completely the aperture, because it's a self-preservation strategy. But without others to wake it up again, then that's a death sentence, because vitality's gone permanently. That's kind of where I am on that one.
Yeah. I love that. And one other thing you've said, Michael, I've heard you say a number of times, is that our trauma happens in relationship, and then we need relationship to heal. And that's just really landed with me strong. Maybe could you talk a little bit more about what do we do to take off the tourniquet, and what do we do to bring that life force back?
Completely. For whatever reason, self-help culture and personal growth culture has largely become an individual experience, like a very personal, inward self-experience. And there's a built-in shortcoming there, because some of the most powerful transformation and healing that's possible, and some of the most necessary healing and transformation, comes from relationship and doing this with other people. So there need to be groups of people out there creating a culture of what it means to return to wholeness and fullness based on your basic microculture. Like what's a warrior culture of healing look like? That's going to be different than another culture of healing, which might have some of the same components. But we do have to do it together. We're formed in relationship, we get wounded in relationship, and we heal in relationship. And that's my mentor, Dewey Freeman, saying that. And so we don't lean enough on these relational ways of healing. Having a period where there's a group of people for a long period of time, or people that have these values integrated into their personalities that we hang out with and spend time with regularly.
Yeah,
I'm just taking some notes because it's so super good. I don't want to forget it. I know I could watch this podcast again, but you're just so smart, man. It's just it's benevolent and really powerful. powerful
It's a
wisdom.
gift. I mean, I think that here's part of the flip that happens. Part of the flip that happens from an immature, in my opinion, an immature warrior culture to a mature one, is that your pain, your struggle, in an immature version, is something to keep to yourself and to keep quiet about and to hide. If you say it, it's seen as a threat. It's looked down upon. It's maybe made fun of. And what happens in a healing culture is that those things are the things that actually bring you closer to each other, and you find them as sources of strength. You've been hiding your wounds the whole time. It's almost like embarrassing. There's a lot of animals in the natural world that it's shameful. This will actually happen in animals sometimes. Is you'll have one that's physically wounded, and almost out of a primal compulsion, the other ones in the group will attack that one that's wounded. There's something about showing and carrying the wounds that invites some sort of attack and distance and separation. And so moving into maturation knows, it has the wiser perspective that, if we actually look at that and work with that, that person is actually more vital and more able to fulfill their role and do so in a good way. So the pain, instead of becoming shameful, becomes the invitation into deeper connection and into the healing. I mean, this was Robert Bly's whole huge platform, is he said that, especially for men, the way into health was through your grief. You had to learn how to grieve. It was an active process, and it wasn't just crying.
Like a fish gulps water.
Yeah.
Robert Bly.
Exactly. And it was medicine. And that's sort of like a borderline spiritual transformation inside of a person or a man, when you understand that going into those things, it's counterintuitive to the young buck, but going into those things are what returns us to our depth and to our maturation.
Yeah, two things that come up. One part of when Philip and I teach the Valor framework to warrior culture, fire, police, military, different types of culture. One of the things that happens is, in order to do your job successfully, you actually need to disassociate from emotion in order to do your job. Because if you were sitting there and somebody dies and you got the next patient coming in, you can't actually do your job if you allow yourself to feel. So the culture, or even military, right? You're on the battlefield. If you start to feel what's happening, you actually could get killed, right? You could not protect the brothers and sisters to your left and your right. So the culture's taught, when you're on mission, you have to disassociate to deal with this later. The big challenge is there was never a later. So the community that we're around has been taught. And so I think, to your point, immature warrior culture teaches you how to handle the battle, but doesn't teach you how to come home with that same group. Because if they did, now when you leave the battlefield, and this is what ancient cultures did, is they had permission to say, battle's over. Now, before we go home, let's go through a reintegration process to offload all the shit we took on and support each other to move through this together so we can come back to our families. And I think that's the missing gap, at least from our lens. We see that as the gap that's missing, is we just didn't get the training. And so people are still operating in a shame-based culture because they're like, we're on mission when you're at home with your kids or your family or your spouse, instead of realizing we've left the mission and we're coming home now. And so that reintegration piece is pivotal. And then I think in our men's community, the difference we're seeing is the difference between pride versus honor. And so pride-based cultures are shameful. Like, you actually speak up around a lot of men and share any vulnerability, they attack you, right? So we've been conditioned, well, hide my insecurities or anything weak about myself because I'm going to get attacked. But in a honor-based culture, you learn to share those so you can illuminate them, to make peace with those parts and have healthy grief and process, so you can build strength in those areas, versus having them kind of like an open wound that you touch and you jump. You actually go in and start to, take the tourniquet off, sew them up, make peace with them, and then they're not as, people can touch them all day long, and you're like, okay, I'm more at peace with my inadequacy. I'm more at peace with some of these deep wounds because I've excavated them and gotten more pacey. So I love what you're saying, is these tools and frameworks are available if we have the understanding, and if we have healthy community that can support us through this process and looks at it from your point as like a mature culture versus an immature culture, which is still valuing it as weak.
If you're a veteran, first responder, or working in a high stress, high trauma field, and you could use some MAPS tools and resiliency training, please join us at valorresiliency.com.
I think if I'm going to go back to the why question just for fun, for whatever reason, there are a lot of parts of humanness, especially in the masculine world, that get compartmentalized into like being a boyish or childish thing, like flow of emotion, affection, joy, so, just certain really deeply human things. A lot of visceral, deep feeling. And for some reason, men learn through modeling. They really do. And if we don't have modeling, you're going to have a problem. It doesn't wake up as naturally for some reason. So right now, one of the problems I see in my work and in my experience is that most of the modeling that men have, like the last time that they were a really flowing, vital being was when they were kids. And so to return to learning how to grieve, or, you guys were talking about crying a little while ago. We don't have a model of what that means to have a really powerful integrated person who also lets themselves go there. So a lot of people feel childish when they do it, and some people are childish when they do it because that's the last time their circuitry knew how to move that energy through. So we got to upgrade the wiring in us and understand how to move, because the deep grief of a man is different than the deep grief of a child. A man carries so much more burden, so much more awareness in his mind and in his heart and in his soul. So he really needs to learn how to move all that stuff through. And so we need those models. We need to see it done and feel it done, and stop sort of labeling all of these parts that make us complete and human as childish or childlike. There are very mature adult versions of them too.
Okay.
I just wanted to share that we had an interesting discovery just in our relationship doing a lot of this work together, in that we are doing the best we can at exploring the modeling of vulnerability and the modeling of self-care and the modeling of abyss level challenges. And one of the discoveries that we had is that the moment we did that, it actually gave the other man an opportunity for honor, which was a strange discovery and kind of a little golden surprise, in that all men love to be seen as valuable and powerful and the one to carry the load and the one to give the gift. And if we're not able to express vulnerability and ask for that support, then we're shutting down that marketplace of getting to be strong for each other, because it's not available. There's never a chance to be able to help another man out because they don't ask for it, and there is no vulnerability. And that's something that we're really working on modeling for our men's group and that community, is that it's okay to see and acknowledge and then present that you're having a hard time, and let the other men carry the load. Let them step in and hold the shield and run the ball, because there's glory in being able to be the guy that is the strong one. And if you don't allow anybody to be weak, then everyone has to be the strong one all the time. What a toxic shit show that is. So that's been a little secret discovery that I've been very grateful for, Josh.
Yeah, I've loved that as well. And I think as we continue to learn this, I'm learning more and more that is strength. Like the reframe is, it actually takes, like, which is harder, to actually own that you're going through a really difficult time and express it to other men that you want to show up and become, be a strong, powerful leader, to actually be able to say, hey, I'm going through the shit. And to know that's, to me, really vulnerable. It takes a lot of courage. It could feel humiliating potentially. So it takes a lot of courage to own that. And then when you do, to your point, Philip, there's this like, oh, I'm not letting anybody down. I'm actually elevating and passing the honor. And I think I've learned that primarily through our dynamic of really like having a really healthy business partner that crushes like I do, and being able to say like, oh, wait, like I'm going through it. And then you're like, sweet, I got it. Or vice versa. it's a relief because you're like, and then giving each other permission to go like, go take care of yourself. Cause we value, again, those core values of vitality. Like, hey, rebuild your vitality. I'll run the ball while you go build. And it's just I'm noticing that's a really healthy dynamic. Uh, you know, part of what's coming up, Michael, is this, one of the ways we look at this is there's these different parts of a human. And, we use the king of the four houses or these different archetypes to identify like, who do we have to be in what situation to step into, to adapt into that part of us to show up. So a lot of what we're talking about here, I would place in that lover quadrant. And so for those that are
Absolutely.
listening, how does that show up for you? I know you've talked a lot about the lover archetype, and how do we learn to flex in this? Because something you said before is if we are tourniqueting things and not looking at things, we suppress those, and that starts to come out as addictions, like all this other different stuff. So how do we start to re-access that by using that lover archetype? Stepping more into flexing into that aspect of us.
I often begin just with the review of the four archetypes that the warrior, the magician, and the king are all doing archetypes, and the lover is the only being archetype. And so part of what happens in the transition back into an integrated version of us is we've got to reclaim the being part of us. The lover part of us is goes deep in to the psyche, the soul, the body, into joy, pleasure, pain. And so I think what happens, one way I've been playing around with things like addiction, it's a way of still doing the lover archetype instead of being it. Because it's like it's a particular activity, it yields a certain feeling or energetic experiences in the lover quadrant in a finite period of time for a certain function. It's not a way of life. And so you'll watch guys that are really stuck in the warrior, king, or magician archetypes often have shadowy sides of the lover archetype, like addiction or depression, substance abuse, or compulsive sexuality, or something like that. Or you see total absence of the lover archetype, like total rigidity, coldness, irritability, deep depression, anxiety. And so a big part of returning to an integrated, mature self is to reclaim that lover quadrant. And it is counter-programming. It can be counter-conditioning at first. There's a lot in the way that we construct those other archetypes that resists flows of energy that rearrange us. And I don't think it could be any greater blessing to let yourself be rearranged by the deep flow of vitality that life wants to move through you. And so it's a certain kind of surrender that seems counterintuitive, but gives a great blessing. For any of you that want to kind of explore this in a lover way, you can look at Rilke's poem, The Man Watching. Final line being, this is how this man grows, by being defeated decisively by greater and greater things. And so there are certain kinds of defeat and surrender that actually expand us and make us deeper and richer people. And so that's back to surrendering to grief. But yeah, it does come out sideways in the lover archetype. You see this evident, like men and women that are really involved in warrior culture have higher rates of addiction, of mental health, depression, suicide in spades, multiple, like many times more than the average population. So you can see the imbalance even just in the statistics.
So when you talk about beingness I'm thinking of the warrior that's sitting there going, what does that mean? Like, I don't, what the hell is that? Yeah. Like, yeah. I don't so, and also to talk through where there may be judgment, because a lot of times in a warrior culture, or let's say a very masculine household, that was pretty much taught that you don't go, this is a no-go zone. So how do we reframe the value of going there, which I think we already have, but to connect the dots, like, hey, if you want your life force back, you want your life back, you got to go into this house, because this is where your family lives, your relationships live, your connection with yourself. So you got to go there. And it's not actually weak. It's courageous. Is it easier or harder to do it? Men do hard things. So if it's harder to do, then you're going to do this, even if it's hard. So I just want to build that bridge. But what does beingness look like? Like, what could that look like to the guy going, yeah.
Hey, just as maybe the resident warrior archetype on this call, really,
Please.
I strongly identify with the results and the impact and the acquisition and the competitiveness of my life. And without those things, I'm dead. And I have to die for me to stop. For me to actually stop and sit with myself and meditate in the morning, or to attend a meeting with somebody, or have when one of my, Josh or my wife is like, hey, we need to have a little conversation. I'm like, oh, it's a dagger. I mean, it's a dagger. Like, I don't want to do that. So, maybe a little, some of the reframe on that would be really valuable.
Sure.
Michael.
Sure. You bet. So how to make it concrete? Like, what do you actually do? You first have to go a little bit on a quest. You have to find these parts of yourself. You have to find where you lost them and what was lost. You do things like therapy or some sort of program like K4, some group experience. You take up some sort of non-cognitive practice for yourself, like certain forms of creativity. You play music, you write, you journal, you move, you dance, you do breath work, you do all kinds of stuff. So you first have to find that flow inside of you. It's an experiential thing. It's something you've got to feel. It's not something you can do very easily. You can create the structure where it comes, but you can't do it. And it's an aesthetic experience. It's a certain quality of yourself and your life. It's one of my friends has a great way of putting it. At first, he says it's like coming in from the cold. You know that feeling you get when you come in from the cold and your whole body perfuses with like a flush feeling of like life force. When you start shifting your way of living that makes space for this stuff to come back in, it will. You'll feel it in your relationships. The bond you have with the people you love will feel different. You'll love deeper. You will have more energy. You'll have a lot more creativity. But at first it is inconvenient. You're right, Philip. It's a little counter to programming, and it can feel like a drain or a barrier. But I think that each man has to find his door in. You know, just like in the Grail stories, like each man has to go into this lover archetype at the door of his choosing that's calling to him. Some of the common ones are any kind of creative expression, movement in your body, even watching movies, great pieces of art, playing with friends or with your kids, certain forms of sexuality and sensuality, food. All these things are ways to kind of get back into it, but it's important to do the deep dives. You'll feel that first burst of energy. Like once you feel that stuff coming back, you can't unfeel it. So the goal is just to get yourself, you have to try a lot of shit first. So I couldn't lay it out for you because it really is one of those, like, how could you explain to a 7-year-old what it's going to feel like to go through puberty and be like a sexual being as an 18-year-old or 20-year-old? It's just, it's a whole different, you can't explain it. It's a felt thing. It is a fundamental transformation of the self. So.
Well, I think the answer in there somewhere is in metaphor. Is that
Yes.
we can use placeholders for that thing. And I know that, Josh, you used a brilliant analogy of, our emotions are the gauges of the truck. How do we maintain the truck? That's a metaphor that us warrior culture, like, we know very well that you keep your truck clean, You keep your truck maintained. You check your fluids. Because otherwise you're not mission ready. It's shameful to have a non-mission ready vehicle or gear. And we take care of our bodies too. Warrior culture. If we have an injury, we take care of that shit. But as soon as we slide into, now here's the abstract tourniquet, then all of a sudden it becomes a little squirrelier. And a lot of times we'll go, that's a hard one. There's almost a replacing an abstract mission with a concrete mission metaphor. Like that quest is the mission.
Hey,
Warriors like missions.
Philip, I got a really good line when actually you were saying that, just from personal experience, because I'm currently on a feminine cleanse. I've currently said no to porn, anything to do with the feminine currently, except for platonic friendships. And I'll tell you from personal experience, what I'm noticing is the different level of energy to accomplish mission. Think of the metaphor of you're driving an old truck from the 1960s, and how does that truck move versus a modern day, like turbocharged truck. That's the difference that I'm starting to experience. So my level of energy, power, force, vitality to actually build, to like leave legacy, leave missions, like take the stuff I've been wanting to do but couldn't quite actualize, instead of using all this will and force and power like that us warriors will pull ourselves through because we're at all cost mission. There's a different level. It's like a turbocharger where I'm like, I just have more energy. I have more vitality, more power to be like, I push a button. Whereas before I was like, it took everything I had and I was still drained. And then I was trying to fight and push my way and hack through. Now it feels like I got this momentum behind me, pushing me. And so I think to warriors listening, this will give you ammo, power, force to accomplish mission at 100x and probably finish projects that you've been putting off for the last decade or 2 decades or 3 decades. So I think that's the mission element of what it gives you.
Another kind of synonymous word would be, it is your duty. It is your duty. That's a big word for warrior culture because it's connected to honor and the things that we will literally sacrifice ourselves for honor and duty. So expanding the concept of duty in that to be reclaim the role of a vital father or a patient, benevolent partner. That makes sense to me. Expanding the duty to the inner space of the relationship space, the lover house.
I think back to the proverb that Bly used to quote a lot. And Michael Meade quotes a lot, the Irish proverb that you don't give a sword to a man who can't dance. And so we've got to be willing to say things that might seem counter to current culture. But, what do y'all get from that? Like, what happens when you hear that? I certainly think a few things. Like, how would you dissect that metaphor? That's a proverb. It's supposed to be a teaching thing. You can't nail it down in one statement, but it's something to think about. Like, why would that be? Why would one of the great warrior cultures have a proverb that says that?
Yeah. I think that is connected to the wild man versus the savage man conversation. Again, back to the Bly or the Culculane Celtic, warrior archetype piece is that if you are only a warrior, if you're only a savage, you forget that there's another side to the sword. And the dancing part is the humanity of that and the recognition that that sword that you have has 2 sides. And it can cut you, it can cut your family, it can cut all the inward facing side of you, not just the outward facing side. So that's the wild man or man in full version that I believe that parable kind of alludes to.
Love it. One thing that stands out to me about it is we've talked about that the warriors are the ones that protect life. You know, they protect the things that we stay alive for. But do you know how to participate in the things we stay alive for, like love, relationship, celebration, meaning, family, joy, honor, rest, leisure?
That's the being. That's the being archetype of the lover.
That's the being.
That's the
exactly.
full circle. And that's the difference between
Yep.
ending up in the triple D, you know, giving your whole life of service and then ending up, drunk, divorced, and disabled, versus actually leaving your career and then living a full life that you've created. Like that's like you get to have a full life for the service you've given.
And I have another add to that, and I just man, are you able to participate in the life that you're willing to protect, that you're dying to protect? I see, and I certainly have been culpable of this where I have martyred myself so that my family doesn't have to deal with hardships. For like my daughter, I have worked so hard so she won't have to deal with what I dealt with. And what I've done is I've simply passed on that ancestral curse of you don't live fully for yourself. You constantly live for others. And so I have been tangibly aware of that over the last few years of needing to model a healthy, sustainable, vital life with all of its challenges and failures and defeats. And I want my daughter to see that, because now that's the greatest gift I can give her, is that vitality and resiliency and vulnerability and forgiveness, and as opposed to wanting to be this bulletproof Teflon dad or leader in the internet space. That's just passing on the curse of an unsustainable or unachievable fantasy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Participation.
Yeah, so many people, I mean, if you think about what we hear in the rooms of people working through their deepest wounds, how many of those are, caregivers or people we really loved wouldn't be with us in like an attuned, loving way? That they were always doing something different, or they wouldn't just be with us. And so that's a huge piece. Like, do you know how to just be with? Are you so lost in the doing? And the martyr, gosh, that's a tricky one for a lot of reasons, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Martyr, masochist.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right. Sadist, martyr.
It's such a, I feel like poking at it just a little bit, like the martyr is a way for people to sometimes deflect. It looks really noble. But the martyr doesn't see the consequences of what it's doing. Like it's not a real complete version. It's not a good model for day-to-day life. It's a good model for really intense moments where the needle needs to move, but it can't be a way of life.
Yeah, I would agree. I also believe it's a way to avoid being with self, because if we're supporting everybody else or carrying everybody else, then we disown self. And part of this is the reintegration. The beingness is the reconnection and compassion to self, and like, I got me too. And then we model self-care. We model, back to that vitality conversation, Philip, we model, we can take time to have vitality and take care of ourselves, versus just grinding until we have nothing left is what I know that's the model that a lot of us are shown.
I'll just speak real quick to something that's holding a lot of my attention these days, which is how, it's a shadow work piece. How do people hide inside their virtues and values? How do people actually perpetuate some really unconscious stuff by hiding in their virtues and values? I'm just trying to do this for you. Or like, I'm just trying to communicate well. Like, it's a very tricky hiding place for us to look in our virtues of like trying to be good or nice. All of these things, that's a tricky place to hide. So people will really hide in like, I'm doing my duty, I'm doing good, how could you criticize? Like, I've just got to do this. Like, inside the self-concept of like, this is who I am, I'm doing so much good. You have to also look at ways you're falling short, in ways that your attachment to your own self-concept of being a virtuous person in a certain way or a certain pattern. It's an intense type of mirror to look. Like, virtue's a really strange
spiritual
hiding
bypass.
place. Yeah, it's a spiritual bypass.
Yeah.
And this.
I'll own some of that. I'll own a little bit of that.
Me too.
And this has been so much fun. I think that may be a topic for a future one, is jumping into a little bit more on shadow work, what gets lost in the psyche, what is shadow work for people that are like, what are you even talking about? So this could be a fun conversation to dive into. For those that are listening, how would they get a hold of you or learn more about you, Michael?
Sure, you can just go to my website, michaelgaycounseling.com. There's a couple of podcasts I've done up on the website. You can also email me through the portal there. So be in touch in any way you want.
Or Lightning Tree
MG on Instagram.
Awesome.
Yes.
Hey, it's been so fun. Thanks for coming on. And
It's an honor always. Love you guys so much.
Community, so appreciate you, brother.
Thank you.